All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, here in Dallas, Texas at Boomi World. And boy, are things going crazy here, folks. We just saw what I'm going to call the best keynote ever. Steve Lucas gave a keynote this morning in which he was cracking us up, but he was also making point after point after point about the transformative world we live in these days. And Boomi is at the center of the action. This company pivoted, 20-year-old company, pivoted a couple of years ago with Steve Lucas at the helm to focus on AI and AI orchestration. And folks, I'm very pleased to be here with Mani Gill, who's the VP of Data and AI at Boomi. And Manny, I'm just going to jump right in. What's your AI plan? That's the big question for everyone out there. I'll throw it over to you for Boomi, but then your thoughts on organizations, your clients, what should their AI plan be? So start with Boomi and then your suggestions.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I think of, I'm in product and engineering, building out these AI products as well as these next generation data infrastructure products. And there's just such a great opportunity to use AI in our daily lives. As a product manager, when I'm writing a PRD or product requirement document, I have indexed all of the information about all of the product requirement documents that we've created in the past, all of the defects that we have, what's happening in the industry. And so why would I not leverage all of that with agents to help me? Essentially, that's the augmentation part of it is, help me create those documents, right? Now, they can't take over and just create them and then I just let them go. I need to still interact with them. A job of a product manager, product VP is to define requirements, understand, synthesize, and then gain consensus across the organization. That includes Steve. He's a very important person as part of that chain. But I can use AI to help. Now, where we are currently in that curve is that it is delivering individual productivity, right? So we can create our code, X percentage of our code now is being written with AI assistance, and we can create the assets. It helps us accelerate design, but it's really individual productivity. And so kind of the next frontier, our AI plan is to get the team collaborating around AI. So how do we get the AI talking to the AI as we're going through this process to even shrink it further? Now, why is this all important for my AI plan? Because, the market is changing very, very quickly, as you can see. I've been at Boomi for 6 months and responsible for Agent Studio, which we're launching next week. Wow. So I was able to come in, wrangle it, define what it is, create pricing, packaging, get it into early access, 300 customers, get feedback, and get it delivered within that 6-month time frame.
That's amazing. And, as I've looked at this rapid evolution of AI in the enterprise, I've sat back and thought to myself, there are going to be several characteristics of winners in this new economy. And one will be install base. Because if you have an install base, you already have a tapestry on which to paint your vision. You already have connections. Companies trust you to deliver valuable services. So you have a good audience to start with, but you're not so big that you have the inertia of large organizations. Do you think that's going to be a really good characteristic of Boomi to really move forward quickly and own this space?
I think so. I think that's well said. I think about it in the context of our customers are doing integration and automation today. And the way I describe synthesizing, gaining consensus, automating processes is what AI does really well, right? And so our customers, I just came from a session that we delivered a hands-on how to create an agent. I asked the question, how many people have used an agent? How many people have created an agent? It was about a quarter of the room. Now, by the end of the session, I asked the same question, how many people have created an agent? And everybody put up their hand because we took them through the hands-on session, right?
That's
And
funny.
that is the existing customer base.
Right.
So how do we help them get into this space, accelerate their business so they can be productive? Because they're hearing a lot, they're getting a lot of pressure internally. And so, yes, we definitely have an opportunity to leverage that customer base and make them more productive.
Right. And you're the VP of data and AI. And I love that you brought those two together because AI without data is nothing, quite frankly. I mean,
So wood behind the arrow.
well, I love that. When you mentioned that the other day, I really like that. The tip is AI, the wood or the data is the wood behind the arrow, and the wood is most of the device, right?
Yes.
And you also have the feathers. So I'm not sure where we'd get those, but they,
Yes.
there is an age-old adage in, I think it's Aesop's Fables, and it's something like the hawk and the arrow or something. And it's like we often give our enemies the tools of our own destruction because an arrow hits the bird and he realizes that, oh, you've got feathers on that arrow of yours. And to this day, we have to be careful because this is very powerful technology. And Steve talked a lot about that this morning. We have to be responsible with these things. So we need to have governance. We need to have guardrails. And the data is going to fuel this next generation of technologies. But I guess the question I'll throw to you, or the comment I'll make and get your thoughts, AI can help with this whole process. So you want to make sure that your data house is in order if you're going to leverage these technologies. AI can help you identify where you have problematic data, where you have missing fields, where you have PII. So my point is that it's an accelerator throughout the entire life cycle. So if you have challenges with your data quality, you can use AI to identify where they are, start fixing them. That's one thing AI agents are going to do, right? Is go crawl around and fix problems in data.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like yourself being in the data space for a long time, I always felt that the challenge as a product person was always, we are in a data marketplace, and largely it was being driven by supply. And now this data marketplace is being driven by demand because the agents are thirsty for data. If they don't have the data there, it's like using OpenAI chatbot, right, on your phone, or Siri, which is not very good at anything these days. It seems to be declining. But that demand side is what's going to drive things. And I think to your point of productivity, I think that we're just at the early stages, right? So at Boomi, we made a lot of fanfare around the agent studio and creating agents, et cetera. But quietly on the back end, we are working on agents that will help with your whole data landscape. One great one that'll be unveiling at a session later today is called the data connector agent. And so if you think of one of the issues around data in your data landscape is there's always a new endpoint or to connect to, right? To get data out of, or the schema is continuously changing, right? And so when a schema drifts or a schema changes, what happens? The pipeline breaks, right? And so this data connector agent can essentially connect to any specification, create the agent, but also monitor to see when actual changes are happening,
right? So
that your pipelines don't break,
right?
So that's one great example. Another great example is our Data Hub product, which is a master data golden record environment, and it specializes in synchronizing data and hydrating applications, right? So think of hub spoke model where I've got multiple applications that I'm synchronizing. And I need a single source of truth to be able to, whether it's a customer master or a product master. Well, a lot of the folks the way I just described that, I believe that every single person who's doing integration should be using a master data environment. Right. Because that's how you're going to get trusted data into all your systems. Part of the issue is a skill set gap, which is not everybody understands how to create data models. Not everybody knows how to write SQL like you do there. Right. And so the AI can help you with that, right? So we have an agent that will, you can interact with the agent to describe what type of product master or customer master you want to create.
Wow.
It will create it. It will help you iterate through it. At the same time, it'll help you learn what you're doing. Just two examples, many more opportunities to also just watch your pipeline, see what's breaking, look for anomalies, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, since the dawn of DM radio 17 plus years ago, I've been looking at the whole data landscape and sort of scratching my head at the amount of effort used to move massive amounts of data around and around and around the bend and around and around. And I thought to myself, that is not very efficient because you're not going to use all the data you just moved. Now, historically, there's been change data capture. That's nothing new. We've had that for probably 35 plus years, which is a very elegant way of getting things done. And as I look at agentic AI and the data connector AI agents, the other ones you talk about, I think that is going to revolutionize how we're accessing data and moving things around to where we do not need to be moving these massive amounts of data around and around. So you're going to relieve pressure on data teams and data engineers who can then focus on building new agentic pipelines that are going to be much more efficient. So yes, it costs money to go down this AI agent path, but I think we're going to save a whole heck of a lot of time, money, and headaches and boost developer morale and business morale by going in this direction. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. I worked on a product when I was at SAP called Data Federator. Just like the name, this is probably 2006, 2007 timeframe. Just like its name, it federated data. So the promise was that, hey, you didn't need to move this data. Now, the problem was that what was the end goal? The end goal was that you needed to take data from multiple systems and then do very complex analytic queries on it. And it just, the technology just didn't scale, right? So in that scenario, you needed to have pipelines that move data into a data warehouse. And obviously now with more modern data warehouses, but we've gone through in-memory databases, we've gone through a whole set of things. But when you think of agent and the agent workflows, right? This type of virtualization and federation, there's a real opportunity to leverage metadata in that context and real data for agent context and awareness. So yeah, I think there is a simplification that can be had, but it also is something that the data engineers are going to need to architect, because some of the data you'll still need to move. And it's identifying the data that you actually need to move and persist, right? Versus the data that can stay where it is and stay fresh so that, hey, we can get real-time access to it.
Right. Okay, we got about 4 minutes and change left in our opening segment here. In a panel, I just heard Ed McCoskey and Steve Lucas talking about the vision, where things are going, and Steve, as he is wont to do on occasion, threw some shade at the model context protocol and said, if it's coming from Anthropic and Google and all these folks suddenly agree on something, you better watch out for it. What are your thoughts on MCP and how tangible or important it really is going to be in light of what we're saying here, that agentic workflows can do all these amazing things very elegantly and very efficiently? How big is MCP or not?
Well, I think it points to a realization that Anthropic, Google, like think of all the names, right? OpenAI, it came to, which is, hey, we've got these great LLMs and we continuously update them and are evolving as it relates to that and innovating. But for these systems to be truly useful in the enterprise, they need access to business data, right? And they need to be able to execute. And so what does that remind you of? That reminds you of integration and automation. And so, the concept started with tools, but the heavy lifting is, how do you actually make these tools and there's data available to these agents? And so it's an attempt to say, here's a protocol so that we can all agree upon how these things communicate with each other. And I think Steve's point was probably that, having a definition just the way we had YAML definitions and XML definitions, or XML-A, do you remember that specification around OLAP? it still requires that the client and the server expose those in a way that
I see.
is rich and usable by individuals, right?
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, XML was supposed to be the way, and then what happened? JSON
JSON.
took over, right?
Yeah.
It's like, remember SOAP,
Yes.
Simple Object Access Protocol. It was the WSDL folks were like, it's going to be SOAP, and everyone's like, now we're going to use REST. Thank you.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yeah.
So it's like you have to look to the world to see who's using what and what's really taking off. You know, my business partner, Dr. Robin Bloor, once mused years ago, he's like, there are two types of standards, the ones that all the good and great people agree upon, and the ones that are forced upon you. And I thought that was pretty funny. And it's like, we want the ones that people agree upon, the ones that are working. Because it's like, you think about development in general, you need a community of developers to agree on basics, on standards, whatever protocol you're going to use. To agree on that is very important, and you want that to be an organic thing that develops with some perhaps nudging and nurturing, but not forced on people, right?
Yeah, maybe just as you're mentioning that, one standard that does come to mind that we both lived through was ODBC, right? And ODBC, the way I always thought about it, and then JDBC, is that it provided kind of a good enough access point, right, to databases. And then over time got better and better, obviously, but it also depended on the database provider,
right,
to have their ODBC client,
right,
or server in a position that you could,
right,
and it was updated. And the reality is native connectors still won the day, right? And especially with things like CDC and stuff, right? Because the heavy lifting of like, okay, what truly changed or triggered in the database, that was not available through the ODBC driver. So some of this will unfold. Part of it will be, we'll live in a joint world.
Right. Wow. Fascinating stuff. Well, folks, we're sitting here in Dallas, Texas, talking to Mani Gill, M-A-N-I, Gill, G-I-L-L. Look him up on LinkedIn, VP of Data and AI here at Boomi. And we got several more segments coming up. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio at Boomi World in Dallas, Texas. So much fun, so much interesting stuff going on. And next up, I have Ariel Pohoryles. He comes from the Rivery acquisition just a few months ago. Pretty exciting stuff. Boomi is really fleshing out its portfolio geared around integration, automation, and of course, enabling AI. And Ariel, of course, I've known about you guys since long before the Boomi acquisition, and was always impressed with your data pipelines and data orchestration, and how you've taken that to the next level, recognizing this tremendous need to feed systems like data warehouses, obviously, but also hydrate your applications. Some people call that reverse ETL. Maybe just tell us from your perspective, why should Boomi clients be excited that Rivery is now part of the package?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me. It's really, as you mentioned, a lot of announcements happening here today. One of the announcements I'm really excited about is the announcement of Rivery becoming Boomi Data Integration, which is the very first kind of move to help our customers benefit more from the integrated platform. And what that really means is that we are taking a similar approach that we had for Rivery for many, many years around really streamlining data pipeline development, moving away from having to stitch too many different tools to build a data pipeline from end to end, and applying that across all your processes in the business. So not just around data integration, but also around application integrations, around API integrations, and of course, packaging all that together to be able to really get to that agentic AI kind of a future, which we're seeing deploying in front of us every day now.
Right.
Being able to really leverage all that data foundation and the integration foundation into processes which are fully managed by agents. That's really kind of the thing that excites me the most about what customers will be benefiting from as the platforms come together. I can also add that, even at the tactical level, as we are earlier in our journey of integrating and we're becoming Boomi Data Integration, there's already nice wins our customers are seeing, specifically around data connectivity. So Rivery, Boomi Data Integration now came in with 200 integrations out of the box. Boomi had more than that, and the nice thing, there was not a lot of overlap between the two. So it's a nice library of connectors. And the one that I'm most excited about now specifically is the SAP one, which is always a hard one to get. Extracting data from SAP is not something SAP lets you do so easily. And so we are happy that we can now integrate with Boomi for SAP, which is a great product that allows you to extract data from Boomi's application layer, from SAP application layer in a certified fashion, simplifying a lot of the ABAP coding, a lot of the functions that you have to reproduce if you were to extract data from the database itself. So you pull it from the application layer, and then you move that into your cloud data warehouse, may it be Snowflake, may it be Databricks, BigQuery, whatever your destination is, with a Boomi data integration now extracting that and loading it into that destination. So that's kind of the first win, and there's many more to come as we integrate the platforms deeper across all the capabilities.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, data engineering, connections, integration, this is blocking and tackling. And so in football, I love football analogies. You have your front line, your offensive line. Their job is to push that defensive line back and open pockets for the running back to run this way or for the quarterback to throw long passes. You're buying time. So blocking and tackling, it's very important, but it's tough. It's hard work, or at least it used to be. And in this new world of modern data pipelines, as we can characterize them, it's a heck of a lot easier. And I think it's going to be even easier still when these agentic workloads and workflows start tackling some of that mundane, tactical activity that needs to happen. But it's a means to an end is the point, right? Like blocking and tackling itself is not the means to the end. It's a means to the end of scoring touchdowns. And that's innovating in the organization, that is opening up possibilities in the business. And, one of my favorite concepts to talk about is this concept of opportunity cost. If you're doing one thing, you're not doing something else. What is the cost of that net when you sit back and think about things? And if you have to spend too much time blocking and tackling, you're not spending enough time thinking, creating, innovating. And that's really the door that's opening right now as this platform approach for data integration really takes hold, right?
Absolutely. I love this analogy. I'm actually more of a tennis fan than a football fan.
All right.
So the analogy I'm thinking about is when I play tennis, try to construct a point. And the way you construct a point is you have to get your point moving around into the right places. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is set up that foundation towards then being able to apply what Agentic AI can offer, is really around greater level automations, new data products you can build. But of course, all that needs to be powered by a foundation of data that's trusted, that's automated, that's providing the data in a reliable fashion. So then you can really get to that point where you're smashing the ball away.
Yeah, and you learn through the process. I mean, that's the other fun thing, right? Is that now that you're part of Boomi, of course, I think last year they said they had 20,000 clients. Now they say 23,000 clients. So a 15% increase over the course of a year. That's pretty good. So you've now got a much bigger install base to talk to, and it's always easier to upsell an existing client than to sell some new client cold, right? So I think your timing is pretty good, especially with all this pressure, the sort of sucking sound of the need by boardrooms to get into this agentic game. You're going to help get companies or have companies get their data house in order, right?
Absolutely. And we've been talking to customers and partners here at the Boomi World, and what we're hearing a lot about is we want to consolidate. And the reason they want to consolidate is not just because they want one vendor to invoice them, it's because they want to really be able to simplify. Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of motions are around that and the cost, but really they also need to move faster. And they know that if they have too many tools, they need to hop around.
Right.
And different incompatibilities between those tools, what really creates is separate resources, separate teams that are managing those environments and slowing down the rate of innovation, the pace of being able to integrate and automate as the business requires it. And so being able to do so in one platform, whether it is a data process, an ETL, ELT process, or whether it is an application integration process, that's really what excites them about consolidating and being able to then accelerate the pace the business requires.
Yeah, and just to throw yet another sports analogy in here, the relay race. The United States, in the Olympics the last time, we had some tremendous successes in the relay race. And in the relay, that handoff is crucial. If you don't time that handoff properly, first of all, you can drop the baton and then you're in real trouble. And that happens. Projects crash. They realize we didn't have the data we needed. The results aren't what you want. So you have to really focus on running fast, obviously, and then getting that handoff nice and seamless. And that's really what we're talking about in blocking and tackling on the data front to enable the business to do something next. You don't want to take too long on the front end of that process to get to your second person, the business innovating, doing things. You really want that to be seamless. And I feel like that's where we're heading. And that's really the big value of having this platform where people on the inside know where the handoffs are. People know when to hand off that baton. And I think that's going to be part of the success story here at Boomi with Boomi Data Integration. But what do you think?
I think you're spot on, and of course for us, what's critical is to get it right from an integration perspective as we bring our two platforms together, make sure it's a seamless experience for our customers. That's what we're starting to do today with Boomi Data Integration, and you'll see more and more of those integrations coming into play across the platform capabilities, making it as simple as customers as possible. Excuse me about that.
That's right.
As simple as possible for customers to integrate those applications together through the different capabilities of the platform, and avoiding that baton dropping, as you mentioned.
Right.
And so that's a lot of what we've been asked about. It's a lot of what we're looking at. And I think one way that would help us get there is that agentic AI experience that we can then simplify and provide as an entry point. So instead of having to learn how the platforms come together from a technical kind of canvas-like experience, you could actually now go into an agentic experience, talk to the platform as if you were to talk to any ChatGPT or any LLM kind of experience, and build those experiences under the hood with a simplified, streamlined interface. Of course, all that is powered by MCP, which under the hoods connect all the services together. But that's going to be a key element for us, I think, as we integrate the platforms together and make that very simple for our customers to pick the best choice for their use cases.
Yeah. And you know what? Back when I was in high school, I didn't do too much in sports, but one thing I was always very good at, maybe because I have long legs, was the hurdles. And one thing I learned is that when you're doing the hurdles, never look at the hurdle. Always look past the hurdle. The second you look at that hurdle, you're going to hit the hurdle. So I was really good at that. I could look beyond the hurdle. And then one time I looked down and bam, hit that damn hurdle. Pardon my French. But that's true too in this blocking and tackling to prepare for agentic workflows, right? Keep your eyes on the prize. Don't get bogged down in technicalities. Agents can help with that. LLMs can help with that. I mean, you can learn so much on demand now. Any developer can become a 10x developer, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great example for that is the investment we're doing around building a data connector agent that will help customers integrate more data sources in that rich library I talked about earlier. So I talked about bringing the Rivery, now Boomi Data Integration Library, with the Boomi existing library of connectors. But at the end of the day, even if we offer 1,000 connectors together, that's still not enough to all the APIs and data sources out there. And so what we're trying to do now with our data connector agent is really simplify that experience even further and allow our customers to leverage agentic AI to build new connectors, even if that's not a natively offered connector. So to your point, yeah, I think that's kind of keeping your eye on the prize and almost kind of leveraging that as the solution to the goal you're trying to reach.
Yeah, and I think that confidence is so important. Trust. I love that quote that Steve gave today. What did he say? Innovation moves at the speed of trust, or something like that. Which, wow, that's a keeper. I'll be quoting that one for years to come, especially in the data world, because when users and companies use some new product or solution or data product, for example, if they get a bad answer, it's once bitten, 1,000 times shy. I mean, they just walk away and they say, I'm going to go with gut instinct now. So that's why it's so important to get it right the first time. Isn't there a song about that? Get it right the first time. And that's the main thing, right? And that's why you're focused on really doing the necessary work to map out how these platforms come together and to deliver for the end user that nice, clean experience for how to build these modern data pipelines, monitor them, manage them, get them rolling and humming, doing what they're supposed to in preparation for agentic workflows, right?
Absolutely. And I think you touched upon an important point there, the monitoring piece. It's not just about setting up those data pipelines very, very quickly. It's about getting full observability and visibility into the activities of the data pipelines to be able to gain that trust. And ideally happening in a way that's proactive. So not asking the user to come into the system and check, how my pipeline's doing, are they running successfully or not, but really be alerted when it's a problem. And so to your point, prevent that failure at the end of it and make sure that it's caught up ahead of time. A lot of that is baked into the way we enable those automated pipelines around things such as schema drift management, self-healing processes that continue to run even if there's a failure. But even around helping our data engineer users to troubleshoot problems. We recently rolled out an AI-based capability again to help fix challenges and failures that come up when data pipeline fails. when you think of it, data integration is really not just the product that you use, but it's also bringing a data source and a data target, which are separate products with their own set of errors that they can throw out. So it's not all necessarily in our documentation available to our data engineers to understand where the problem comes from. We need to understand the target documentation as well and understand how they solve for a certain problem. That's exactly where we use AI to pull in the right set of steps for our data engineers to understand what a certain problem a root cause could be and how they can solve it with that. So all of that is really designed, to your point, to help reduce as much as possible scenarios where end users come to the results and are running away from it because they feel it's completely wrong.
Yeah, well, and you think about in the world of troubleshooting, one of the classic approaches to take is a playbook. We have a playbook. Okay, I learned this happens in this environment. When I get this error message, someone actually types in, this is what happened, here is what I did. Now, a lot of that stuff can be done dynamically. And that's the real magic, right? Is that the system can scan and watch what's happening, and it recognizes a pattern, and it says, aha, this is a pattern I've seen before. I mean, that's what the agents are going to do, is like, oh, okay, I've seen that pattern, go ahead, make the fix. Because the environment changes, right? Even if your system that you're pulling into isn't changing, well, maybe the source system is changing or the target system is changing, and you can't manage all that. You can't control, especially with partners, right? They're going to do things differently, and you need a way to be able to absorb those changes, recognize them, and make changes on your end. And that's going to get much more fluid over time, right?
Absolutely. And that's something we're building internally. It's not an AI agent we're exposing, but it's an agent that we use internally to monitor the sources that we connect to, especially those APIs, as they constantly evolve, to your point. So we have our own agent that helps us understand when those API change, and then based on that, completely manage that for our customers, so you don't need to worry about that. So that's a great example for where Agentic AI is really helping us accelerate our development processes and make sure that it's as seamless as possible for the users.
Yeah, and we got another segment coming up here in a second, folks, but I have a lot of friends who are developers, and they will tell you that when you're a developer, you kind of go into the zone. You maybe put the headphones on, take a deep breath, and start looking at this code, start looking at what you're working on, and you want to make that experience very clean and very crisp, I guess is the word that I would use. And you don't want to be distracted. And that's the thing, is that if you're constantly blocking and tackling on errors that should have been fixed already, and trust me, this happens all the time, that is going to bring morale down. And you don't want your developers being down. You don't want your data engineers pulling their hair out. You want them building things, building pipelines, maintaining this nice flow in their environment such that the business can get what it needs, can innovate, can change. And then when the business comes back and says, hey, now let's do this, they're ready to go. They're not burned out. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio with Ariel Pohoryles of Rivery, now the data integration platform at Boomi. And we're talking about modern data pipelines. And let's just kind of dive in a little bit to future-proofing your environment. And there's a lot of observability in that. There's a lot of architecture and really kind of understanding the component parts. And Ariel, one thing that really excites me is thinking how these agents are going to help us optimize the information architecture. I was talking with Mani earlier. 17 and a half years ago when we launched DM Radio, I had already been in this industry for, about 6-7 years. And I understood ETL and ELT and populating data warehouses. But the amount of data that they would move around and around and around again, all these batch windows, I'm thinking, this is crazy. That is a tremendous amount of effort, because anytime you move data, there's a chance of trouble. There's a chance of fields getting truncated, jobs not completing properly. There's cost, there's expense, and there's just this rigidity. And that's really what the old architecture is like. It's very rigid. In the early days of data warehousing, the schema was static. You're not going to change that schema unless, the world ends, and then maybe you'll change it. Now you must be much more agile. You must be much more nimble and to be able to cater to your business, because things are changing so fast. The competition moves very quickly. We talked about this in the keynote this morning. Your competition is probably looking at this stuff. So in terms of future-proofing your architecture, I think agentic workloads are going to really help us optimize these architectures and be much more efficient and much more lean in what we do with data. What do you think?
No, absolutely. You mentioned 17 years with DM. That's incredible.
I know, I'm old.
Quite a bit. Well done. I think that's a few days after I started a few years after I started my career. So it's been 20 years I've been doing data engineering as a practitioner. And back then, to your point, schemas were very rigid because we were doing mostly ETL workloads. We had to transform data before it's being loaded. So now it's been a few years, the cloud emerged, we've shifted to ELT and sometimes even streaming processes. And I think what we're trying to do more and more of is really completely automate the process end to end. Schema drift, to your point around schema rigidity, is a great example, but there's other elements in the automation that comes into play. It's around the way we extract data in a way that's very efficient from the sources. For example, using CDC-based approaches to efficiently take just the increments and then loading that in a way that's compliant with the targets we load into, such as Snowflake and Databricks and the likes. So there's a lot of automation that comes into play. And one thing that data engineers are really happy to do is coding new solutions. But one thing they hate to do is really go back to solutions they already coded and maintain those. And that's something that we ask data engineers over and over again. They spend more than 50% of their time doing maintenance of things they built in the past. And so being able to really automate that process, both from a data integration perspective and the data that's being moved and the schema that we automatically evolve, but also from an infrastructure perspective and managing whatever compute power you need behind the scenes to process the amount of data that comes in. And as we all know, data volumes are growing. The refresh rates are just keeping up in terms of going downwards towards a close as possible to near real time. A freshness of the data. It's no longer a weekly report or even an hourly report. We're talking about down to the minutes now, sometimes near real time in terms of seeing data as fresh as possible, especially when we come to Agentic AI solution and that will be activating and making decisions for us.
Right.
So all those things really need to be as automated as possible. You mentioned observability. That's an important component to make sure the automation is working. But before we even get to the observability piece, we need to make sure that we automate the infrastructure support that we need for those data pipelines, as well as the data movement piece in it.
Yeah, and obviously Snowflake and Databricks aren't free. They cost money to leverage, and so you also want to be cognizant of that as you're using these technologies. And so the leaner and more efficient you can be, the lower your cloud computing cost is going to be, right?
Absolutely. That's actually a great example. Talking to one of our customers earlier today, they managed to reduce their Snowflake bill by 83%. And all they've done is really just move to a CDC-based approach that loads it incrementally, but does so in a way that matches a much faster pace of load time on the Snowflake side, reducing the compute time that you're being charged for when you use Snowflake. But the other component to it that's making it a bit more complex is when you look at CDC pipelines, typically the extract is done in a streaming fashion. You constantly listen to a log file that the database is producing to see what changes they are happening in your source database. But then you don't always want to load those immediately to the target, because the target is then going to charge you. Snowflake and Databricks and others will charge you based on the compute time. So you want to have maybe an area where you can kind of stage that data and then load it only when you actually need it. And so that makes the pipeline a bit more complex, because you have streaming on the input and then some kind of a staging area where you load the data on certain batch into the target. So it's a bit of a mix of both streaming and batch, and that's getting quite tricky. And so managing that efficiently, to your point, can make a big difference on your overall bill. And that's something we try to help our customers with, a lot of flexibility around the way they control that pipeline, not just getting kind of a one option to choose from, but really a set of flexibilities and configurations where they can really adjust it to their own specific business requirements.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And we just got about 4 minutes left here. You brought up a really interesting point, and I've pondered this for quite some time now, ever since Kafka came out. Now, of course, there's Red Panda. You can always build a better mousetrap. They decided to go ahead and rewrite to be much more efficient. As one of my audience members jokes with Java, write once, break everywhere, because it does cause trouble down the road. And that's the maintenance you're talking about. That's when things in this garbage collection isn't done properly, and you're like, oh, geez, you're scratching your head again. But when you talk about streaming versus traditional batch-oriented, static type environments, that's a huge difference. And I've always kind of wondered to myself, how are we going to reconcile these worlds? Now, there are some companies that are net new, have a greenfield, they could do a streaming first architecture. Amazing things can happen if you do a streaming first architecture. But if you're an existing corporation with a data warehouse and lots of applications that are relying on existing processes, That's a bit more tricky. So is that an area where you're going to be focused on talking to clients and kind of helping them understand how to integrate these two very powerful but very different technologies? Because there's an impedance mismatch, as we say in the database world, right, between streaming and like traditional batch-oriented data processing. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, that's a very good point. We see a lot of customers using those legacy ETL tools, still running on-prem, operating data in a certain way, and then they get excited. And how do we move to automated data pipelines? How do we now accelerate that process? And it's not a small migration. I mean, there's years of investments, to your point, in those data pipelines, business logics incorporating that. And so even if you want to move, it's not always as simple. And so what we really try to strive the customers to do is really focus on the higher data ROI use cases. And when I say data ROI, that's a term we see more and more spoken not just by CFOs, but the actual data teams themselves. Data teams are inundated with requests from the business. And so to prioritize, really try to kind of challenge them and think about what's the ROI of that request. Is that data request really going to drive a new data product that's going to make a difference in our business? And so that's really where I try to push our customers to think about when they talk about modernizing and moving away to maybe just the traditional ETL batch processes to a combination of stream, maybe stream all the way, maybe still batch, but in an easier fashion. It doesn't matter so much around the way it's happening on the hood. Boomi Data Integration provide multiple options to choose from. It matters most around what's going to be the value of that use case and what kind of business benefits you'll see out of it.
Yeah. Last question, I'll throw at you a bit of a curveball maybe, but I sit and think about these things all the time. You typically have these different strata of companies. You've got your IBMs, your Salesforce, these are huge organizations. You have all sorts of very small startups that are very agile. And Boomi is such an interesting character in that field because it's not huge, but it's not small. 23,000 clients, that's a lot of clients, but it's not so many that the organization is stuck in inertia. Are you excited to be part of that because of the potential going forward?
That's a great question. Early days of Rivery, we're kind of thinking about what's the end game. Of course, a lot of us imagine an IPO or maybe getting acquired by an Amazon or a Salesforce, one of those giants. And when Boomi came along to us, it was like, oh, maybe this is actually the best route for us as we think about how we can still be impactful, how we can really bring our technology to the front at the same time, benefit from the scale the organization has without getting lost in it. And so it's been amazing. I mean, integration has been moving forward so quickly. We just announced the acquisition back in December, not even 5 months. We already have the platform's first phase integration launched today. And the plans forward are really exciting for us to see. So yeah, I couldn't be happier about that move.
Well, that is very, very cool stuff. And as I said earlier, I thought today's keynote was the best one I'd seen ever because it was very informative, very forward-looking, visionary, but funny. Steve is funny. He kept joking about the robot. He's like, you looking at the corner of your eyes, looking at me, right? Feeling awkward. Well, folks, you've been listening to DM Radio.